Hello, today I'll be sharing how I make my version of the Cheesecake Factory's Louisiana chicken pasta. It's not an exact copycat recipe, but to me this is close enough. It's super good, it's really easy to make, and it does not require any heavy cream. So I'll start by working on the chicken. So here I have one really large chicken breast, it's about a pound. I slice it down the middle just to make sure that it cooks evenly and quicker. So I'm sprinkling it with some garlic salt, and I'm also going to add some black pepper. I like to keep the seasonings pretty simple because the pasta itself is really flavorful, so I make the chicken a little bit more simple. So I'm just going to sprinkle the garlic salt and the black pepper on both sides. And once that's done, I'm going to coat the chicken in some flour. I have about 1/4 cup of flour on a plate, and I will just coat the chicken on both sides. I'm pretty sure that the Cheesecake Factory coats their flour with some egg and probably breadcrumbs as well, and then deep fries their chicken. I've done that before, but even though it tastes really good, I think my stomach just doesn't like all the oil. So I try to keep my chicken pretty simple, but of course, this would be really delicious with some chicken that's coated with some breadcrumbs as well. So now I'll start to work on cooking the chicken. So I'm going to add about half a tablespoon of butter to a hot pan, and I'm also adding a drizzle of olive oil. And I'm going to lay the chicken breast down on the pan in a single layer. I'm going to let the chicken cook for about 4 minutes or so on each side. So I'll let it cook first on this side for about 4, maybe 5 minutes, and then flip it over onto the other side until it is fully cooked. I do use a meat thermometer to make sure that the chicken is at least at 160 degrees when I pull it out, and then it finishes cooking on the cutting board because you do want your chicken to be at 165 degrees. Then I will cover the chicken with some foil and just let it rest for a few minutes while I prepare the rest of the ingredients. So now back to the stove, I am going to add about 8 ounces of mushrooms that I sliced onto the pan. There was still some oil left over from the chicken, so I just went ahead and used that and added the mushrooms. I like to cook my mushrooms before the rest of my vegetables because I feel like if I add all the vegetables, it'll overcrowd the pan and everything will kind of steam instead of cook properly. So I just cooked the mushrooms. This took about, I would say, 10 minutes or so. You want to make sure that the moisture leaves the mushrooms, and then it'll start to kind of brown and crisp up a little bit. And I'm not a huge fan of mushrooms, so I need my mushrooms to be very crispy. Otherwise, I probably won't eat them because the texture of wet mushrooms I am not a huge fan of. So I'm going to remove the mushrooms from the pan and place them on a separate plate and just set those aside while I cook the rest of the vegetables. So I'm going to add about a tablespoon of butter and a drizzle of olive oil to the pan and wait for the butter to melt. And once the butter is melted, I'm going to add 1/2 of a red onion and 1 sliced bell pepper. I like to use different color bell peppers for this sometimes. I think it just makes the pasta look nicer, but today I only had a red bell pepper, so that's what I used. So I'm just going to stir the vegetables and let them cook for about 10 minutes or so until the vegetables are fully cooked. So here I am just stirring the vegetables, and then sometimes I let them rest for a little bit, then come back and continue stirring until they're fully cooked. And once the vegetables are cooked, I'm going to add the mushrooms back into the pan and toss it all together. And then I'm going to create a hole in the middle of the pan and add a drizzle of olive oil. And then I'm going to add about a 1/4 teaspoon of red pepper flakes and about 4 cloves of minced garlic. The red pepper flakes are optional. You can also add more red pepper flakes or less red pepper flakes depending on how spicy you want your pasta, but about a 1/4 teaspoon is good for me. So now I'm going to cook the garlic and red pepper flakes with the oil for a few seconds before I mix everything together. And once the garlic and red pepper flakes become fragrant, that's when you know it's time to add the rest of your ingredients. So this whole process went by really quickly. It was about 30 seconds. So now I'm going to add 2 cups of water and 2 teaspoons of this Better Than Bouillon vegetable base. You can always use the chicken base. You can also use 2 cups of chicken broth instead of this. I just didn't have any chicken broth, and this is my quick way of making chicken broth. So now I'm just going to stir everything and let the bouillon dissolve, and then I'm going to add 1 cup of milk, and this is what's going to make the pasta creamy. So I'm adding 1 cup of 2% milk. Whole fat milk would probably be better, but 2% is what I had today. And then I am also going to add 2 teaspoons of Cajun seasoning. This is something that I put together myself, but you can always use your favorite Cajun seasoning. I just don't buy Cajun seasoning because I feel like I don't use it often enough, and it's pretty easy to put together yourself, but of course you can use whatever you have on hand. I'm also adding 8 ounces of bowl type pasta. You can use any short pasta. My favorite pasta to use in this is penne pasta, but my husband likes the bow ties because that's what Cheesecake Factory uses, so I use bow ties on this day. So I'm just going to stir everything together and let all of that come up to a boil. And then once it comes to a boil, you'll just want to lower it down to a simmer and then stir the pasta occasionally for about 20 minutes or so. So you're going to leave it here at a simmer for about 20 minutes and just coming in every now and then to give everything a stir, making sure that nothing is stuck to the bottom, and also making sure that some of the pasta that's up on top eventually gets dipped down into the bottom. And as you do this, you'll notice that the pasta begins to cook and the sauce begins to thicken. It's actually really cool to see how the pasta, the starch from the pasta, the milk, and the oil and butter all kind of interact to thicken up the pasta. And it creates something that's very similar to what you would get with heavy cream, but of course without heavy cream, and it's still really good. So I'm just going to continue stirring the pasta until it's fully cooked. If at any point you see that the pasta is drying up and it's still not fully cooked and it needs a little bit more liquid, or if you just want it to be a little bit more creamy, you can add a splash of milk, maybe 1 to 2 tablespoons at a time, to make sure that the pasta has enough moisture to cook, but also you don't want it to get super soggy, so just a little bit at a time. So here I'm adding a little bit of extra milk because I felt like it was a bit too dry and I just wanted to add a little bit more milk to this. So I'm just going to stir everything together and wait for that to finish cooking before I add the rest of my ingredients. And you also want there to be a little bit of liquid left in the pan once the pasta's done cooking, because we're going to thicken it up with some Parmesan cheese. So here my pasta's done cooking and I'm going to season it with a little bit of black pepper. At this point you'll want to taste it and add some salt and pepper to it. Also remember that you're going to add Parmesan cheese, so you don't want it super salty. So here I'm adding a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese, and then I'm also going to add some chopped parsley, and then I'm going to mix it all together. And this is pretty much done. After this, you can give it one more taste. I usually give it a taste at this point and add a little bit more salt because I feel like adding salt before I add the Parmesan might make it a little bit too salty. So here I just tasted it, added a little bit more salt, and this was pretty much ready to go. I also like to add the chicken right on top, so I sliced the chicken that we cooked earlier, and then I am just going to add it right on top of the pasta before I serve it. And once I add the chicken back in, that's pretty much it. This pasta's done. Now I just need to plate it. So I like to serve it with a little bit of Parmesan cheese sprinkled on top, and then I also sprinkle some parsley on top to give it a pop of color. And that's it. It's pretty easy to make. It's very simple, and it doesn't require heavy cream, but still has some of that creaminess to it. So this is something that I make fairly often because we really enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.